Lokati here. Today we are talking about our end game build guide for our Poison Pathfinder. We did make some changes over the last week as we have developed this build. Initially, it started off as an armor evasion build, which was great getting through the campaign and great for the early part of mapping. But in order to maintain survivability in the higher tier mappings, we needed a much higher base health pool to work with. And so we did switch over to energy shield and evasion to give us the extra boost we needed to survivability from very large unavailable hits and from very, very strong degens on the ground, which previously would absolutely just melt us and rip through a very small health pool. And so I do think that armor and energy shield is definitely the way to go in the end game over armor and evasion. Now for our passive tree, we have made a few changes here. You'll notice obviously a bigger focus on armor and evasion nodes. We have this one shock and extra damage as lightning node over here. Just gives us a little bit of an extra boost against bosses when we hit them with a big toxic growth, getting that shock debuff on the target. We have all of our typical poison nodes here. We dropped low tolerance because we're no longer relying on contagious contamination to spread out a really big poison because our clear is much, much stronger with in-game gear on the build. We dropped the chaos skill bonus over here because the chaos damage does not appear to affect poison damage after testing, and this +1 to level becomes less valuable to us to spend the points to get over to. We have our typical damaging ailment bonuses down here, our poison over here. We have our quiver bonus here, only necessary to get the one node. The two on the side do not give us another proj skill over the one that we have, and so we're just taking the node up to here. If you end up wanting to min-max this a little bit more, you can pull points like out of energy shield and evasion, put this down here, and in your jewel sockets, you can put in some quiver bonuses and hit some of those breakpoints to get one additional projectile skill level. But gas arrow does not scale that heavily off of the levels, and so I don't think it's necessary to go down that road. We have a lot of fizz damage and attack damage over here because that all scales our poison magnitude as well. And then on our passive tree for our ascendancy, we're going overwhelming toxicity, traveler's wisdom, and running assault. And I think those are the best choices on the tree right here. Now, as far as our skills go, we are running gas arrow with despair and rain of arrows as our debuffs. This is a curse debuff for chaos resistance. This is wither debuff for chaos damage. We have escape shot for getting out of sticky situations. Wind dancer and ghost dance for defenses. On gas arrow, we are binding gas arrow to scatter shot, deadly poison, chaos mastery, heft, and comorbidity. Scatter shot allows us to create more clouds at the same time. 3 clouds apply poison 3 times as quickly and makes it a lot easier to maintain your poison uptime, especially in high mobility situations. Deadly poison is just more damage by a huge, massive margin. Chaos Mastery is worth it right here, although you could switch this out for Inspiration if you want a little bit less damage and a lot more quality of life in mapping. We have Heft here because more maximum physical damage converts to more poison, and we have Comorbidity because more poisons equal more damage. Toxic Growth we are binding to Brutality because we really don't care about this thing doing any poison damage. We just want big fizz hits. Execute for damage against low life enemies. Long Shot because we're going to be leaping away and doing damage anyway. Martial Tempo because it's already slow. We need it to be faster so we can get more off or we can get back into a mobility position faster. And Concentrated Effect because bosses have large hitboxes, so we need to gather up all of these little toxic growths in a smaller area so that they all trigger and hit the boss at the same time instead of being spread out and only some of them hitting them. And then obviously 40% more damage as well. Avoid getting any extra area of effect on toxic growth. It's very bad for the single target DPS on it. Despair we have bound to Heightened Curse, Curse Ground, Ritualistic Curse, Magnified Effect, and Life Tap. It gets a little spendy, so Life Tap helps to compensate for that, especially since we're not casting it that often. Magnified Effect and Ritualistic Curse give us a larger area of effect, so if the boss moves, they may still be in it after their movement or during their movement. Cursed Ground puts it on the ground instead of on the target. This one is strictly my opinion. You can not run it and cast Curse on the boss, but I prefer putting the Curse on the ground because it's more useful in situations where there's a large AoE that you need to burn down very quickly. But your opinion can vary on that one. And then Heightened Curse is a no-brainer. Rain of Arrows, we're Chaos infusing it to guarantee that we hit with Wither because you need to do Chaos damage to hit with Wither. Persistence for a longer duration of the Wither. Calling Strike to go ahead and cull things that are in Rain of Arrows. And Maim to slow targets down, so hopefully they don't move out of the Rain of Arrows very quickly. Escape Shot, we have Bound to Glaciation for more freeze buildup. Frost Nexus for chilled ground. Cold Penetration for more damage, which means more freeze buildup. More elemental weapon damage means more freeze buildup, and increased freeze duration. So if you freeze the enemies, they stay frozen for longer. Mostly this is just, oh shit, I'm surrounded, and you're trying to kind of slow down the horde of enemies to keep you alive. On Wind Dancer, we are running Blind, so that everything that gets hit is blinded, which means it has less chance of hitting you. Energy Barrier, which means as soon as you are stunned, Wind Dancer goes off, your energy shield recharge begins immediately and cannot be interrupted for nice assistance and recovery. Life Thief, so that the physical damage also leeches to you, so you have more recovery. Heavy Swing, so that it's more physical damage coming from Wind Dancer, because Wind Dancer is tagged as melee. And Cold Infusion, so that that cold damage added on top of the physical damage both slows and possibly freezes targets that are all swarming you. Ghost Dance, we are running Fast Forward, so we get more Ghost Dance charges faster. Clarity, so that we have some mana recovery. Cannibalism, so we have some huge life recovery against huge swarms of enemies. And Herbalism, because increased recovery from life flasks is always a good thing. These secondary supports here on Ghost Dance, these three, you can change them to whatever you would prefer to. Now, if you have the int for it, which is really hard to achieve, you can go ahead and add Blink in here and run Blink instead of one of these two options, or get Spirit onto your gear to support Blink, or pull off some of these secondaries for Blink. And I know Mobility is listed as one of our weaknesses down here, and Blink can help cover some of that, but it is a huge workaround to try to squeeze Blink into here. And so I'm preferring to stick with the setup as it is. Now, as far as your leveling, you're going to start off with Poison Burst Arrow, then you're going to switch to Poison Burst Arrow and Toxic Growth, and then you're going to switch to Gas Arrow as kind of your main source of damage, with Toxic Growth as secondary here. Now for gear. We're going to talk about each piece because it's important to know why we picked what we picked on each piece. On our bow, fizz, 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 fizz. Literally, if all you have is a perfect fizz bow, nothing else on this thing matters. The projectile levels is really good. Bow attacks, fire an additional arrow is okay. Increased attack speed is quality of life. Really just want the biggest fizz bow you can possibly find with projectile skills. That's what you're looking for in this slot. On your helmet, you're looking for a pure energy shield helmet, and you want as much energy shield as you can physically get on here. That's the only thing that matters on this helmet. The rest of it is just going to be resistances to fill your resistances. On your armor, you want the highest evasion armor you can get, and then resistances to fill whatever resistances you need. On our amulet, we want as much evasion rating, as much max energy shield, a little bit of max life, projectile skills, and resistances. On our rings, we want fizz damage, and we want ideally a breach ring so that we can put a 50% quality to that fizz damage, because that flat fizz added is such a huge amount of damage. And then we want life, mana. You're going to need some sources of mana. We get some from our belt, some from our rings ideally, because the skills will get very expensive and your mana flask will help keep up with it, but you need enough mana to be able to cast 2 or 3 of them back to back and then move while your mana flask is restoring your mana. Outside of that, you want leech on your rings. You want physical attack damage on one ring, ideally mana on the other ring. We'll go ahead and... Oh, we have mana on the other ring. One is life, one is mana would be ideal. And then resistances to fill, again. We're way over resistance capped in this gear setup. Obviously, you're not going to be having perfect rolls on everything, but this is just kind of showcasing where you need to fill in for your resistances. On our quiver here, we want fizz damage, bow skill damage, projectile speed, projectile skills, attack speed, and then dexterity would be ideal to help out with stats. We are going to anoint on our amulet here, but this does not currently let us anoint on our amulet inside the maxroll guide right now. And so we're going to be anointing feathered fletching. Feathered fletching is going to be very important by allowing us to use the projectile speed. And I'm not sure if it works, but I assume arrow speed works as well. But projectile speed converted to damage. And so that's very good. But that is going to be our anoint, which is why we have projectile speed on our quiver here. On our boots, we want to go ahead and get some evasion energy shield boots with as much evasion and energy shield as we can, as well as move speed and resistances to fill. On our gloves, we want as much evasion and energy shield as we can get with physical attack damage on there and resistances to fill. And on our belt, we want to get an armor belt with an armor affix. It is very, very important that you get an armor belt with an armor affix. We have no armor on the character anywhere. And just a little bit of armor is a significant damage reduction to the total amount of physical damage coming in. We can't take armor pieces in these slots because it's not reasonable to give up those statuses. But this is a superb place to get that little bit of armor so that we have that 10 to 12% physical damage reduction to help give us a little bit of a buffer against a lot of small attacks. And then we have maximum life, maximum mana again. And the last three suffixes on here can be anything. Reduce flash charges used, gain flash charges, stun threshold, charm charges. If you're still missing resistances, you can put resistances in here. Your last three suffixes on your belt are really, really flexible and kind of rounding out your character here. And so that's how we'll take care of all of the gearing. Now again, on the build, the strengths of the build are map clear, very solid map clear. Very, very strong bossing with a lot of mobility on the boss fight. Mostly a one-button build, so it's smooth, easy to play, very straightforward build. Gearing is very straightforward on the build. There's nothing complex, weird, unusual, or unique that we need to gather for the build. Instead of these gloves, if you don't have access to very, very good gloves, you can just continue using the snakebite gloves for the extra damage they provide, but you will want the extra defenses that rare gloves will give you. But that would be the only unique that we'd be considering using. And then our weaknesses on the build are big physical hits are tough, which is why we have the energy shield. You're just going to have to be diligent about dodging slams. We can't tank one-shot slams in the build, so you just got to be good with the boss mechanics on those abilities. We have relatively low mobility compared to some classes by not utilizing blink and not having a real good setup for including blink in our build. And then the last one is burning ground and trail of fire affix. It just sucks. Don't do burning ground maps. That's fairly straightforward. You see on your waypoint if it has burning ground, and you take that one and you stick it back in your stash and you move on to the next waypoint. And then trail of fire affix is also a problem. The reason these are hard is your gas arrow explodes instead of lingering and applying poison, which means you need to spam your gas arrow more often. And rather than getting the gas cloud poison, which is a higher percentage, you're getting a poison on hit from the arrow itself, which is very much smaller. You can combat this a little bit by keeping an envenom support gem in your backpack and swapping Chaos Mastery for envenom, which will give you a much greater chance to poison on hit with the arrow. But Trail of Fire mobs, they just suck. They're going to take a little bit longer to kill, and they're annoying. And so you just have to watch out for them. And then Burning Ground affix just totally bricks it. It's horrible. If you need to run a Burning Ground affix, or if you're struggling with a Trail of Fire mob, you can equip Plague Finger Gauze Wraps, which allow you to poison with the fire explosion. And you can equip Envenom to Chaos Mastery here. And you'll do just as much damage as you did before. You'll just have to spam the arrows out a little bit more, but the explosions will be putting huge poisons on the target, and it'll work for the clear if you need to do the clear on a Burning Ground or a Trail of Fire affix. Other than that, I've really enjoyed the build. It's been a lot of fun to play. It is definitely a more PoE1 feel style build, and it's super smooth, super casual, very good for people who don't want an intense play style. And it farms incredibly fast. So if you have any questions over anything, please leave a comment down below, or any criticisms. I appreciate those as well. You can also come by Twitch anytime and ask questions. I'm happy to help out any way that I can. And don't forget to look at the other 3 videos if you're leveling the character, because the leveling setup for the build is different than the in-game setup for the build, and it's different for a reason. And so definitely take into consideration all of those whenever you're creating your character. Other than that, thank y'all very much for watching. Have a wonderful day. Peace.